I've got a real treat for you today with our first guest, who's Eileen Martin, and I'll ask her to introduce herself in just a moment. But our goal with these interviews is really going to be to feature different people who are survivors, who've got some great inspiring stories of ways that they are triumphing over abuse in their own lives so that we can learn from and be inspired by them. So as I said, our first interviewee for this series is Eileen Martin. And Eileen, thank you so much for being here today. And I would love to just ask if you could start by just introducing yourselves briefly.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Christine. So where do I begin? I am a survivor of domestic violence. I am, more than that, I am also a mom of three, a grandmother of three, and I have changed the trajectory of my life. And after my own healing experience, I became a counselor. I went back to school. It was a 10-year journey of healing and learning and growing. And now my passion is helping other survivors to kind of find their way out and untangle much of what they experienced in their relationships. So thank you for having me again.
That's great. Can't wait to hear more about your story and your experiences, and especially how you're helping others. But to get us started, what does it mean to you to triumph over abuse?
Wow, that's a great question. So I think that triumph over abuse for me is coming back into myself. I think the healing process for me has been, like I said, kind of untangling all those thoughts, that conditioned thoughts and voices that have come from both my abusive husband as well as my family of origin. So kind of learning that everything that I kind of thought about myself was often a learned and conditioned response, and how to learn and grow and find myself and find my own voice, what is true for me. So that's been the most powerful experience for me, is kind of just giving myself space, honoring who I am, coming into my own integrity. And that process began in the counseling office. And that's why I decided to go back and become a counselor, because it was so powerful to have someone honor my story and also allow me to kind of find my way through and become myself for the first time in my life.
That is so powerful, and especially how you spoke about the impact of the counselor that helped you along the way. And you really talked a lot about having to learn about yourself again. And so what did you learn through that process of working toward overcoming past abuse?
Wow. So I learned that I did have a lot of ideas and thoughts that weren't really my own. They were just ways I thought I should be, right? That word should, we kind of use that as when we hear the word should, it's because that's something we learned rather than what's true for ourselves. So it was an opportunity to really find myself in a way that I had never allowed. And I know that's kind of repetitive, but the important thing is coming to this place where I felt really good about myself. Now, I also want, the triumphing is not always, it's not a perfect thing. We triumph by learning every day and healing and growing through our experiences. So it's not like, okay, we're just at this place of healing. I think healing is a continual process, up until the end. So the healing comes in is learning and growing and finding space to make mistakes, to be imperfect, where that wasn't allowed in my relationships, right? We're not, it's a constant, nervousness and being on eggshells and walking on eggshells kind of experience. And the healing comes in from learning to just kind of breathe through and recognize that I'm safe within myself, and other people's responses or expectations don't define my worth. So I think that's the greatest lesson I've learned.
That's so such an important aspect of the journey. And I think just kind of saying that it's not a perfect process, that there's going to be lots of ups and downs along the way. And you spoke earlier about how having that counselor was such a helpful part of you having some of these realizations. So I do think that a lot of survivors or people who are currently involved in an abusive relationship are very apprehensive about going to counseling. So what nuggets of wisdom can you share about how the counseling process can be helpful, or tips for finding a counselor and finding the right counselor? Because you and I both know that there are some people that we probably would not recommend people go to if they're in that situation, if they haven't been properly trained.
Yeah, so I think as far as tips for finding a counselor, I would suggest that you do some research and ask good questions when you reach out. I would, not everyone's going to get your experience. As a former survivor, I get a lot of the nuances and things that other people that haven't had that experience might not really truly understand and be able to sit with you and fully kind of embrace your experience and story, because that's important. I think one of the biggest parts of that healing process is having someone that can hear your story and honor that. That is huge. And that is part of the counseling process. Is I don't have the answers as a counselor for you, but helping you sift through. And that's by oftentimes telling your story and recognizing what you might want for your life at this point, and how can we use your strengths to move through that process and find your way out and become, someone that feels really good about themselves for the first time. Yeah.
And we always try to see the triumph. We always want to empower people to reach out and get the help and support they need. And I think that, what you just said really speaks to the importance of advocating for yourself, and don't be shy about asking questions of a counselor to make sure that they have the knowledge, the understanding, maybe even the life experience to be that right support person for you. And, and understanding that there might be some people that you may want to avoid who aren't equipped to do that.
I would add, if it's okay, Christine, that, oftentimes when we're coming out of an abusive relationship, or we're in one, we often aren't real comfortable advocating for ourselves. So sometimes that can be easier by writing emails to the counselor, right, rather than talking directly. So I would suggest, having a trusted person in your life sit down and think about some questions. We can't do this alone. It's important to know that, and to trust your instincts. If somebody feels right, but also at that point, if you meet up with somebody that's a counselor, if it's not the right fit, and any good counselor is going to say, you need to be with the right person. It's okay to, to try and try again until you find somebody that you really connect with, because it's an important relationship.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more about your own journey as a counselor in just a few minutes. But I was wondering first if you could give an example. Can you think of a moment in your journey where you really felt confirmation and like you knew that you were on the path to healing?
Oh, I don't think there's just one thing. Oh my goodness, it's a continual process, right? It's a continual of putting one step in front of the other, and kind of sometimes hitting a brick wall and saying, okay, so where to next? But it's a continual putting one foot in front of the other, and being comfortable with shifting and pivoting that journey, right? So where does that lead you? And I think that is in the process of life in general, but as far as healing from abuse and finding your purpose, because this is my passion and my purpose, my counseling and what I do to kind of give back. But I think it's just putting one foot in front of the other. If something excites you, or you feel like you're passionate about it, how can you figure out a way through? And that's just trying and being okay with failure, because failure is not a bad thing. It's actually, oh, okay, so this isn't for me, so let me move here. And it's trusting. And that's the hard part after being in a domestic violence relationship, is trusting yourself, because our reality has been shifted, and our perceptions we're disoriented a little bit, because our thoughts haven't been our own for a while. We've been confused, and there's been perhaps gaslighting and different things like that that has confused us. So it's honestly one step in front of the other, and trusting that you're going to be okay, even if it's not the right decision. You'll just shift and pivot to the next.
What would you like other survivors to know about what it's like to learn to trust yourself again?
Oh, wow. Hope and freedom. I think freedom comes in being able to honor yourself in a way that's powerful. That comes sometimes with loss, right? When we start honoring ourselves, some people in our lives, family, friends, that know us to be in a different space. When we start honoring ourselves, that means we have to start holding boundaries, and that can be difficult. So it's kind of still honoring yourself and recognizing that the right people will come into your life that will embrace you as you are. And that's difficult.
Yeah, I think that is one piece that people don't often understand. They think about in that process of recovering and healing, you think, well, I'm healing and recovering from the person who was abusive to me, but also really taking a look at other people in your life who may hurt you in certain ways. And it's hard to, I think, trust yourself in that process of learning to make judgments or better decisions for yourself and how you relate to other people. Or just trusting your intuition. It might not be another relationship or another person. It could be a job move. It could be a financial move, a parenting decision. And it can be overwhelming at times, but I think your way of putting it about how it's such a process is just so valuable.
Yeah, I think we forget sometimes that we have options. We always have options. And that gets lost along the way, I think, when we're scared and we're in our relationships and we're not sure if we're going to lose our children, or, we just think our only option is to, kind of tense up and push our way through the best we can, right? To keep safe, to keep our children safe and figure out. But that is a lesson that can be learned, I think, in counseling and in the freedom part, is that, I hadn't thought about that. Because when you're surviving, when you're in a relationship, kind of all that stuff shuts down, all those things that are often strengths of ours that we would typically know get shut down by the external noise of our abusive partner or husband. So
yeah, it can move from feeling like real tunnel vision, like the one thing you're sort of focusing on is survival and getting through the next minute, hour, day, week, month, however long. And so, yeah, stepping out from that can feel overwhelming and huge and scary, but that's where getting that support, whether it's from a counselor, support groups, reading books, connecting to online sources of information and support can be really so valuable.
Absolutely. It's like driving within guardrails, right?
Right.
That's what we're used to. And part of the healing process comes with, okay, going just a little outside those guardrails, and you can come back in, right? And it's dipping in and out in slow incremental steps.
Mm-hmm.
It's not this perfect jump and leap. It's just starting to learn to trust yourself, to go outside the box or the narrow, vision that you've had.
Right, and knowing that you can come back, you can kind of grow it and narrow it. And I think what does happen for many survivors as they go further along their healing journey is that it's just expands further and further. And it feels like, oh, I have a lot more options now. I am empowered to make decisions for myself among many things. And that's scary, but if you just take it, like you're saying, a baby step at a time, then that makes it a lot more manageable and doable for people.
And that's the freedom, right? Is starting to step into that a little bit, into hope, and recognizing, okay, so that felt uncomfortable, but I survived that, right? It's learning that you can survive those difficult feelings of uncertainty.
I think often survivors forget how strong they are. It's like you can feel so overwhelmed when you're looking ahead at all the options and all the things that you might do, or the different aspects of the healing journey, but just how much strength there is in just surviving, going back to that point about surviving in the next minute and the next day or so. Like that takes so much strength. And I think it's easy to lose sight of that because you might be looking ahead to like where you want to be.
Absolutely. And survivors, it takes a great deal of strength to be in an abusive relationship. It takes a great deal of strength, resilience, and you can use those skills to also heal, right? It's just learning. People think that, survivors can feel like that is a weakness. It's not. It's a strength to try to figure things out and maneuver and pivot in within that relationship, but then learning that you can do that outside of that relationship and be just lean towards that freedom and hope.
So if you could go back in time and give yourself one message when you were back in the abusive relationship, what would you want to tell yourself?
That's a good question, Christine. I would say that, that's tough. I think that I wish I knew that there was something on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Despite all the pain of my relationship and then the pain of coming out of that relationship, because that was really tough. I'm not going to lie that that's a really hard time, but it's kind of like a being at your knees at time where you have an option to really, an opportunity. I think of it as an opportunity for growth and healing. And I wish somewhere along the lines that somebody or I could have shared that had that within myself to know that you're going to be okay, that there is life after this, that there is that hope and freedom that was shut me for so long.
That's so huge. I mean, can you imagine if you would actually be able to go back in time and give yourself that message? And you can't go back in time in your own life, but certainly you can help and share that message, as I know that you do, with other people who are in that, and be able to say, that it's hard, but there's life, there's brighter days that are ahead, even when it's really difficult.
Right. Healing is hard, right? Because we have to look at ourselves and what we think about ourselves and what we've been taught about ourselves. Oftentimes, for me, it was through my family of origin that it started, and that just, it was kind of viscerally punctuated by my abusive marriage. And it's just, the healing is hard, but it's so worth it. Many things that are difficult are worth that time and effort. And that time and effort is hard because it's about you. And we're not often, especially as women, but men as well. But, we often don't recognize that we have to honor ourselves and take care of ourselves first. That gets lost along the way for a lot of women, especially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it feels uncomfortable and selfish oftentimes.
Right. So it may not just be undoing some of the messages and the kind of feelings or expectations you develop as part of that relationship, but also even unlearning things that maybe you were carrying with you for a long time before that too. And so it's difficult, but I think your message is just so valuable that, keep going, keep working your way through it. Like it's not always going to be this awful and so, draining and difficult, but there will be days where it's, lighter and happier, and you can have healthy relationships and pursue your dreams and other things that come ahead. But, you kind of, that working through those difficult days is really part of that process.
Well, I think it's grief, right? You're grieving, and with grief, it kind of comes in waves, right? So we have, when we are able to kind of get ourselves in a safe place outside of those abusive relationships, there is grief. There's grief for the loss of that relationship because that's what we've known, and I recognize that and value that for people that are experiencing that loss. It's oftentimes a loss of, the father of their children. What does that look like? What is my family going to look like? But it is grief. It's a grief for what you experienced, and it's a process. So you'll have days where, oh my goodness, this is freedom. And then you'll have a couple of days that are really difficult, but those days of freedom become more prevalent and the grief kind of eventually kind of fades away, you know, if you honor it. You honor those emotions and that experience, and that's the hard part.
And so, Eileen, as you think about your future and what lies ahead for you, what is one big dream that you have for yourself for your future? And how, if at all, does having survived an abusive relationship fuel your fire for making this dream a reality?
Well, I have a huge dream, and right now I'm not sure what that's going to look like. It's one of those put your one foot in front of the other. Clearly, I love my counseling, but I would also love, I have a dream of creating this whole community of tiny houses for survivors where they have their own space and they have support, that they're not just 30 days and expected to leave a shelter. I mean, I believe that we have to really support people and help them heal and find sustainable jobs, and I think that happens within community. So that is a huge dream of mine at some point, and I don't know what that looks like, but there it is.
I love it. I love that dream, and it's great. It's neat to hear that. And disclosure for those who are watching this video, Eileen and I are friends, and we've been friends for a long time, and I never heard that dream before, so it's so awesome to hear it.
I've kept it within, so this was a big deal for me, kind of putting that out there in the universe, right?
Sure. Well, thanks for sharing it here first. I love hearing that, and if anyone could pull it off, I know that it would definitely be you. So we're about at the end of our time for our interview, but before we end, do you have any final word of inspiration that you'd like to share with other survivors or with other people who love and care and support them?
Sure. I think for survivors, I think it's really important to know that when you are either in or leaving a relationship, that it's often very scary. And we often kind of go back to what we know because that's comfortable. The uncomfortableness in it does get better. So trusting that there is hope, that there is freedom, and find people that believe in you. Try your best to shut out those who want you to go back to that relationship, or even your own self if you can, and give yourself space, because again, there's always options, right? But just giving yourself some space, finding someone that can be supportive, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
So yeah, the big takeaways I'm getting from what we've talked about today is just how important it is to find the right support. It might be a counselor, it might be friends. Hopefully it's a number of different people there. And then also just understand that it's a long, difficult process sometimes, but just as you've said a number of times today, keep taking that one step, that next step, keep moving forward, and just understand that it's going to be a long journey, but it's one that ultimately, especially when you honor your feelings along the way, really will lead you to a better place.
Yeah, and just one more thing, as far as the people that support are looking to help, survivors need to be heard and valued, and if you can, understood. They don't need you to tell them what to do, right? They've lived through that. So the most important thing you can do for someone that is trying to leave an abusive relationship is ask what they need, and honor that, even if you disagree with what they need. That's huge. That's important. And if you are the survivor and you're getting all these voices from others who say, well, you need to do this, you need to try the best you can, and say, so that's really hard for me, and this is actually what I need. This is what I think is best for me, and trust that.
That's a great point too. I'm glad you added that too, because we do have a lot of people in our See the Triumph community who are really interested in how they can help others. And so that's such a great reminder, just to ask how you can support them and honor their voice and their choice in that process as well. Well, thank you so much, Eileen, for being the first of our Survivors Triumphing interviews. And it's just been it's always great to talk to you, but especially really appreciate your time with us today.
Thank you for doing this.
And thanks to all of you who are joining us to listen to this conversation. We hope it's helpful and that you'll stay connected with the See the Triumph campaign for more resources for ending the stigma surrounding intimate partner violence and supporting and honoring survivors. So thanks so much.